Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have the first commission to report. The commissions have already consolidated their report backs. The commission now that is reporting back at plenary is peace and stability. Immediately after, there will be international relations. Someone was asking about international relations. Yes, it will report tonight. And hopefully the communications and battle of ideas, it will also report tonight. So there are 3 commissions. But what we have here is a commission that was discussing for first 2 days. Firstly, is Comrade Joel Maibuye, who will just give a report on the strategy and tactics, and then Comrade Phoebe on organizational design and renewal. They will present both, and then we'll take questions after that. Comrade Maibuye.
Do I use the? Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. No, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much. I thought perhaps before I make the presentation, I should just briefly indicate the character of a policy conference. A policy conference doesn't take decisions as such. It processes the documents that have been circulated to the branches, and the outcome goes back to the branches and other structures for discussion for finalization at the national conference. And therefore, a narrative in reflecting the outcome of the policy conference that seeks to portray victors and vanquished would not be accurate because discussions continue. I will also assume that you are familiar with the long document of about 50 pages on strategy and tactics of the ANC, which seeks to outline the kind of society that we seek to create, and secondly, what methods, what programs we need to adopt in order to achieve that objective. All the 11 commissions for the first day of discussion in the commissions discussed the strategy and tactics document, and the sense that all the rapporteurs and chairs had is that the discussions were incisive, they focused on the substantive issues, and everyone was quite impressed with the quality and the focus of the delegates on those strategic issues. The next matter would be the major conceptual issues that were under discussion. You will be aware that the title of this document is Enhancing Organizational Integrity in order to intensify action towards a national democratic society. This is the first time that the ANC in its strategy and tactics document refers to the issue of organizational integrity, because the assessment is that so fraught has the environment within the organization become that if the ANC does not experience a turnaround, it will not be able to construct that national democratic society that it aspires to. The issue was raised, is it to restore or to enhance organizational integrity? And ultimately, the conclusion that was reached was that we are not looking back to some glorious past, but what we need to do under changed and changing circumstances is to ensure that the ANC develops, enhances its organizational integrity in order to be able to play its historic role. With regard to the strategic goals of the ANC, there was the issue that was raised about how, in simple terms, can we characterize this national democratic society. And the agreement, as reflected in the draft, is that the closest that society can be equated to across the globe would be a combination of a developmental state that leads in ensuring very high rates of growth, but secondly, combined with social democracy, a state that ensures redistribution of resources in favor of the poor. So it is a combination of what you would find, for instance, in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, South Korea, Singapore, and so on. Social democracy, you can look at some European states, especially the Nordic countries. But there was the emphasis that historically some of the developmental states were not democratic. If you look at South Korea, for instance, at the beginning, and that therefore it is important that we emphasize in the South African setting that this developmental state should be a democratic developmental state. There was then an intense discussion on the issue of monopoly capital. And the outcome of that discussion is as follows. Firstly, it reiterates what is contained in the 2007 Strategy and Tactics document. And this is that the relationship between the ANC and monopoly capital in particular, but also capital in general, is one of unity and struggle, or if you like, cooperation and contestation. There are areas where we would seek to cooperate with them. Higher rates of investment, job creation, skilling of people, matters to do with broad-based black economic empowerment and so on. But there is also the challenge of monopoly companies conducting themselves in such a way that they undermine societal interests. Collusion, high prices in the product markets, high returns that would not reflect the correct or appropriate distribution of income between the managers and the workers and so on and so forth. So the relationship is one of cooperation and contestation. The issue was then raised. Do we want to characterize monopoly capital as it manifests itself in South Africa as white monopoly capital? And 9 out of those 11 commissions said the phenomenon of monopoly capital is a global one, and it manifests itself differently in various parts of the globe. And in that context, it would therefore not be correct to characterize ours simply as white monopoly capital. That relationship that we were describing would apply whether that capital is Japanese, it's Indian, it's white, or whatever other category you can think about. But it was also felt that we need to elaborate in that context that in the South African situation, we cannot run away from the reality of white dominance in the economy, in the context of assets, of income, of the professions, as well as other privileges that we have inherited from the past. Why I was saying it is important to understand the character of the policy conference. It is that even if there was that view from the majority of the commissions, the view of the other 2 commissions, the views are also reflected in the report, with them believing that the characterization should be white monopoly capital because of their own analysis of its manifestation in the South African conditions. And it is agreed that that discussion will continue in the branches for resolution at the national conference. There is also agreement that At the instance of the achievement of democracy, the balance of forces started shifting more and more in favor of the forces of change. But in the current period, as I was saying, we are in that kind of fraught environment as a result of objective conditions, the state of the economy, the global economy as well, but also as a consequence of subjective factors, weaknesses within the ANC and its allies, that the balance of forces is not much in favor of the forces of change. And therefore, the decisions that are taken as recommendations at this conference and in December will be fundamental to ensuring that the ANC enhances its organizational integrity and is able to speed up the process of change. If that does not happen, then there will be major and terrible consequences for the ANC. Everyone accepts that. If you have read the document, you might know that two concepts are posited. Can we characterize South Africa today as neo-colonialism of a special type or racial capitalism? After a long discussion, it was agreed that neither of the two are accurate as a characterization of the South African political economy today. Racial capitalism, because it has got its own history and usages internationally today that would muddy the waters. Neo-colonialism of a special type, because what the commissions argued is, whilst there might be some elements of neo-colonialism, you achieve freedom, but you have not as yet attained economic liberation. It's not a static situation. But if we do not move fast enough to change economic relations, we might end up in that state of neo-colonialism of a special type. There was also debate on social agency, what the ANC would call the motive forces, and there is agreement with what is contained in the document, with some emphasis here, the central role that rural women, for instance, play. Secondly, also, that there is a new phenomenon that cannot be ignored. Because of high rates of unemployment and economic marginalization, especially amongst the youth, you have a subsector emerging in society which can be susceptible to mobilization by both or either extreme left-wing or extreme right-wing forces. And that is an issue around which we should exercise vigilance. I should say that those are amongst the major issues, and maybe when questions arise, we will respond to those questions, because I do not want to bore you with a very high-level debates that take place in the ANC. To give you an example, does the ANC have an ideology? And how do you define ideology? And ultimately, it was agreed it's a system of ideas that inform political and economic policy, and in that narrow sense, or rather in that broad sense, therefore the ANC has an ideology. But we'll take questions.
Thanks very much, colleague. Phoebe?
Thank you very much. Good evening. The second part of what the briefing focused on the discussions that we had for one day on organisational renewal and looking at organisational design. And as Comrade Joel said, that the major focus of the strategy and tactic documents is to look at how do we address and restore the integrity of the ANC as a movement for change, and a movement that organize and lead people in the process of creating a better life for all. The organizational renewal therefore focus on a number of issues. One of them is the question about the character of the ANC and what organizational capacities we need to build The second issue looked at how do we ensure and restore organizational integrity. And then the third set of issues focus on the elections, because of course we're going to have elections in a couple of months' time for the National Executive Committee. And therefore, how do we approach this in a way that addresses the challenge of factionalism as well as the challenge of slates that we spoke about. The starting point of the discussions on organizational renewal focus on the character of the ANC. And the ANC since 1994 has identified its character in two folds. Firstly, that it remains a national liberation movement that has to continue to organize and mobilize people in support of their own development and in support of addressing and the creation of a better life in all sectors and across society. This means that the ANC pays specific attention to how it builds branches, how it engages with its youth and women's league, how it engages with the trade union movement as well as civil society and society broadly. The second part of the character of the ANC is that as a registered political party, we also contest elections, and therefore the ANC has to have the capacities and capabilities to govern, to be able to implement its policies and translate it into government policies, as well as monitoring the impact of those policies. In addition to that, and I think it was probably an issue that we have not addressed, and we were a bit in denial about it since we've been in opposition since 1994 in KwaZulu-Natal, at a later stage in Western Cape, and now in a number of areas, that in addition to preparing and developing strategies as a governing party, we also need to develop strategies as an opposition, as well as strategies in terms of coalition, so that it's not something that we do on the basis of as it happened, but that you have a general orientation in a multi-party system that this is what happened. And in fact, over the last 23 years, that is exactly what has happened. On the organizational capabilities, the focus was on branches and what we need to do to revitalize branches, the work in the communities that they play, the link with ward councillors, the issues about taking up community issues, responding to the concerns that communities raise around service delivery, and the kind of relationship between councils and local communities, but also national departments and provincial departments and local communities, as well as the work that the ANC branches has to do around issues of education, so participation in the school governing bodies, in the community policing forums, and in general community activities. So there's a whole range of list of issues that's been proposed with regards to branches. There are also specific proposals that we're making and new recommendations on the role that provincial executive committees and regional executive committees and the NEC needs to play in supporting this mass work of the ANC, and particularly supporting the outward orientation of branches and ANC structures across the board. The organizational capacities also looked at the role of the Women's League. That the Women's League we define as part, and women as part of the motive forces, because in the building of the non-sexist society and the dismantling of patriarchal relations, of course women have the most to gain from that process, and therefore the Women's League has to play an important role as part of a broader women's movement in the country. Similarly, on the Youth League, we looked at the strengthening of the Youth League. South Africa, like the rest of Africa, has a youth bulge. And therefore, specific attention needs to be placed in strengthening the Youth League, but also more specifically in ensuring that government and society in general pay sufficient attention to the development of young people, whether it is the skills revolution, whether it is in employment creation, whether it's in entrepreneurship. It's all part of those issues that we need to look at. There was a couple of specific proposals that will go back to branches for debate. The first one is, which the Youth League has proposed and commissions considered, for a 40% quota for young people across structures within the ANC, and that will go back to structures for consideration before national conference. The other one relates to the relationship between the Youth League and the student movement, in particular SASCO, and how we work together in terms of ensuring a progressive position on campus and contesting how do we ensure that we don't contest elections against each other, but if the student movement contests elections, that the Youth League will then support that process. The Commission on Organisational Renewal, when looking at organisational capacities, also talked about the state of the trade union movement and reaffirmed the commitment of the ANC and the broader alliance towards one union, one industry, one union, one federation, one country, one federation. That the fragmentation that's happening in the union movement is not good for the working class, it's not good for workers. And therefore we need to ensure that we work with COSATU, that we work with all union movements, whether they're within COSATU or outside, towards the unity of the working class movement and towards looking at how do we build unity across the differences. The final issue, I suppose, on organisational renewal and capacities relate to building the policy capacity of the ANC, and there was a very strong view that the ANC needs to strengthen its capacity to monitor the impact of its policies, firstly, whether it implements its policies, and secondly, what the impact of those policies are. And when I come to the suggestions around the National Executive Committee, we will talk about what the specific proposals are. But it also looked at how the ANC engaged with civil society, the new emerging left movements, civil society movements, issue-based organizations, and how the ANC continued to engage and reach out to these structures. The second set of issues focus on organizational integrity, which was addressed within the strategy and tactics document and being one of the major tasks that the policy conference and the national conference in December needs to address. And it focused on how do we address the question about the social distance between the leadership of the ANC and government and ANC members and broader society, and the support base of the ANC. How do we address the issue of corruption? And how do we address the question about discipline within the organization? And there are fairly comprehensive suggestions and recommendations that will go to branches on looking at issues of social distance and addressing social distance. How do we address the questions around corruption, and very firm suggestions about how the ANC must deal with corruptions, that if there are allegations of corruptions, that the provincial, national secretaries and regional secretaries have the responsibility. If action is not taken, that they will be held accountable for the lack of actions, and they will have to explain why actions have not been taken. That the ANC needs to distance itself from corruption, whether it's in its ranks, individuals, whether it's outside of its ranks, whether it is its supporters or donors or people that they have relationships with, that we need to be very firm about that. Overall, the process, the instrument that we see to enforce this process and the recommendations that we're making around combating corruption and restoring the integrity of the ANC is the strengthening of the Integrity Committee that was adopted in the last conference. Now, the proposals that's going to branches is that the Integrity Committee must become an independent structure with constitutional powers within the ANC to be able to summons anybody to account, that they must have the powers to take decisions, and that they will then report the decisions on any matter to the structure of the organization. And that's the proposal that's going to branches for discussion. And then, of course, the strengthening of the disciplinary procedures within the organization. The final set of issues focus on the elections of leadership towards national conference. And the problem that we are trying to address with a set of recommendations that's going back to branches is how do we ensure that in the election of the National Executive Committee, and of course cascading down to provinces and regions and branches, do we address the problem of factionalism that has become endemic and a cancer within the ANC as well as slates? And the following recommendations were made. The first one was with regards to the size of the NEC. There seemed to be a general view, but will be confirmed by the structures of the ANC in the discussion after the policy conference, that we need to reduce the size of the NEC, that you need a much more smaller, workable NEC that are able to discuss issues, that are able to process issues, but also ensure that you do have the best in the ANC making up and consisting of that NEC. So that's the first proposal. And the size matter from anything between 40 and 60 people. At the moment, we have an NEC of about 80 directly elected members. So that's the first proposal. The second proposal is that we should look at the size of the officials. At the moment, we have what we call the top 6. It is the President, the Deputy President, the National Chairperson, the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary, and the Treasurer General. The proposal is, and there are 2 options that we will take to branches and the leagues and structures. The first one is that instead of having, that we should have 2 deputy presidents with specific responsibilities, one looking at international relations, the other one looking at monitoring of business of governance and the implementation of ANC policies, that you then also have 2 deputy secretaries, the one that looks at monitoring and evaluation, the one that looks at communications, and the other one that looks at organizational work, and therefore that you enlarge your officials. The second option that's put forward is that we should only enlarge, that we should only have a second Deputy Secretary General with the task of one focusing on organizational work and the other one focusing on monitoring and evaluation and ensuring that we monitor the implementation of our policies. So those proposals are going to the structures, and this is particularly looking at strengthening the ANC and the National Executive Committee in the areas that we've identified as a problem. The conference also, policy conference also said in commissions that we need to look at a mechanism to decisively deal with factional politics in the elections of our leadership and slates. And there are a number of proposals that are going to branches. The first one is the fact that we have to have elections in the format that does not allow for, does not make it easy for a single faction in the ANC to then get all of the top 6 position or all of the 60 position or whatever amount of positions in the NEC. So instead of what we've done, the practice of what we've done in previous conferences where you have a ballot where all 6 top officials are being voted for, which means that branches, delegates go in there and say that this is our provincial position or this is our factional position and therefore we vote for all 6. And you have an outcome that represents a certain section and a slate within the ANC that we should have an election, one position after the other. So we start at the position of president, and whoever becomes second has the opportunity to be nominated for deputy president or be nominated for the position of secretary general, and we go on like that. So that you do break the stranglehold of slates and the phenomena of slates within the organization. And there's general support that we need to ensure that at this conference we take decisive action to ensure that we move away from slates. The second one has got to do with nominations by branches. That at the moment the way that it works is that branches can nominate up to 60 people, which means that even if a branch don't know all of the 60, somebody can come to them and say that here's a list of 60 people, and this is who you should nominate. And what we are suggesting is that branches we should say that branches must be able to nominate 20 people, which means that you have a fair spread of nominations and nominees from across the country. We also think that that kind of system, both with regards to the top 6 as well as the nominations of branches, will also help to bring in other sectors of society. Because the problem with slate politics is that it limits and narrows the base from which the ANC elects its leadership. Because in order to be elected onto the NEC of the ANC, you have to become part of a particular slate, and if you're not, you then don't get elected. So we want to broaden the scope of elections in the ANC and also make sure that we democratize the process of elections within the ANC and do away with factionalism and slates. And this is the matter for the discussion on constitutional amendments at the National Conference, there was a proposal around a much more longer-term reform of the ANC's, of elections within the ANC, and of course it may not be possible for the National Conference in December, but the proposal that is going to branches as a constitutional amendment is that we should look at a form of direct elections for NEC, PEC, REC within the ANC. So it means that every member in good standing will have a direct vote to vote for a member of the NEC or the Regional Executive Committee or the Provincial Executive Committee, instead of what we have at the moment is an electoral college of branch delegates. So that if the ANC have 700,000 or 1 million members or whatever amount of members we have, all of them in good standing will have a say in who becomes leadership within the NEC, the PEC, as well as the Regional Executive Committee. And that is something that's going to branches. And of course, it's quite a radical departure from the system that we have at the moment of an electoral college of delegates, of branches. And therefore the matter will have to be debated again within the structures of the ANC. Let me conclude by saying that the combination of the discussion on the strategy and tactics, what do we need to do in terms of building the type of society that will address the legacy of apartheid colonialism, that will address the legacy of patriarchy, as well as the mechanisms that we're looking at putting in place with regards to organisational renewal, addressing the integrity of the ANC, reforming and addressing the design issues within the ANC so that it can become much more effective, is part of the major work of this conference of ensuring that we do restore the integrity of the ANC and that we restore the confidence of the people in the ANC and in our movement. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Comrade Phoebe. By way of process, what will happen is that the recommendations as they come from commissions will be packaged in a form of a report, which shall be sent to all branches throughout the country as part of preparation for the 54th National Conference for further discussion, in which conference, therefore, it will adopt or reject, may amend some of the recommendations that come from this conference. I must indicate, though, that I've been informed that the next commission is almost ready. So we'll take as few questions as possible so that we allow the flow of commissions as they finish their work. May we take 3 or 4 questions, please? Ranjeni, no, you're asking the next commission. Samkelo, Pete. You must talk to Kwete Mandashe. He's not happy about your article. You wrote about him. Ranjeni first, go please. Where's the mic? Can someone pass? Okay.
Hi, it's Ranjini from Times Media. Firstly, on the issue of monopoly capital, can you give us, in terms of the proposed resolution, the context is that monopoly capital or white monopoly capital is supposed to be an impediment to radical economic transformation. What is the phrasing now of the enemy of radical economic transformation? And to Ms. Potgieter Kobole, on organizational renewal, you said that the proposal is that the ANC needs to distance itself from corruption, even from within its ranks. What was the discussion in terms of how that should be done? Thank you.
Pete?
Thanks, Izzy. Mr. Netshitenze, both you and Ms. Potgieter Kobole referred to the ANC that needs to restore its integrity, which by inference means that it has lost integrity. One of the big issues in the country for the last 12 months has been state capture, and the ANC's own research shows that that has undermined the party's integrity. Is it not too late now? And if it's not too late, what are the concrete steps that you refer to that the ANC will take to restore that integrity around that issue? Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Samkelo?
Samkelo Masego from Jacaranda FM. I'd like to just ask a simple question. Where does this idea of white monopoly capital actually stem from? Because in what we have read, it also comes from Bell Pottinger. Did you discuss where this concept of white monopoly capital actually began from, or was it a Gupta-sponsored view of a particular faction? Thank you.
Pass it to Put Eric. Is that Put Eric at the back?
I just want to know this is Eric Nake from the Citizen. I just want to know, how is it possible for the branches to be able to elect directly? Because if you consider the fact that branches are the people at grassroots level, and then there's the NEC, there's PEC, is it possible that they will be able to come to the national conference to elect members? How are you going to do it where you say members in good standing will have to elect directly? Maybe it can happen at branch level, but how is it possible at national, even at provincial level?
Thanks, Eric. Comrade Joel?
Okay, I will take the questions and Phoebe will assist because both of us were dealing with both of the elements. Starting off with monopoly capital. There is the first level of a theoretical conceptualization about a certain level of the development of capitalism that some would characterize as monopoly capitalism. You might even have in society where you do not have monopoly capitalism, you might still have monopolies that dominate particular sectors. And then monopoly capital would be a manifestation of that. What is the attitude of the ANC or the liberation movement towards monopoly capital? As I was saying, this conference has reaffirmed what was agreed at the 2007 Polokwane conference in the strategy and tactics document. This is that our relationship to monopoly capital is one of cooperation where there are common interests and contestation where there might be divergences. As I was saying, we want them to create jobs. We want them to invest. We want them to bring technology into the country. We want them to participate in black economic empowerment. And to that extent, there will be cooperation. But there are challenges to do with conduct. Terms of pricing, in terms of collusion. There are challenges also to do with the pace at which some of them are transforming. There are challenges that would apply to matters to do with how some of them respond to government policy and how those government policies may relate to their interests. And so then, 2007 and now 2017, in the formal documents, there is no reference to monopoly capital as an enemy of the ANC or an enemy of the National Democratic Revolution. It's a relationship of cooperation and contestation. Related to this, it's an issue that was raised in the commission. If they were an enemy, what do you do to an enemy? You destroy an enemy. And so our approach to monopoly capital is that to the extent that there might be areas of divergence, you need to regulate and you need to use the word that came from the commission, you need to discipline them in instances where that is necessary. Now there's been this urban legend about where the concept itself originates from. And personally, I wouldn't claim to have done any research on this. Some of the comrades in the commissions were raising this matter, but the approach that bases itself on very recent developments about Bell Pottinger and the Guptas might not be entirely accurate. It might as well be that they are using the concept for their own nefarious purposes, because some of the comrades were saying, I haven't been able to ascertain this, that The 1962 program of the South African Communist Party, The Road to South African Freedom, actually uses the notion of white monopoly capital. And perhaps to further indicate that that is the same Congress of the South African Communist Party that for the first time used the concept of colonialism of a special type. And it might as well be that at the same time as the ANC was adopting the concept of colonialism of a special type in the strategy and tactics document in Morogoro in 1969, it might have used even the notion of white monopoly capital. If it has been extracted by someone for their own selfish interest, that's a different issue altogether. Our discussion was conceptual and not about what strange people might be seeking to do. I should further add that with regard to whether it's too late or not, it's never too late to correct wrong things. It's never too late to ensure that the mass of the cadres of the ANC who want to see this just and equitable society created would have that opportunity to ensure that that turnaround happens. It's never too late to do that. It's never too late to ensure that this movement, that is the glue, in my view, that holds South African society together, corrects itself in order to ensure that that social cohesion in South African society is enhanced. It's never too late to do that. It might as well be that like a snowball, some of the things that were being discussed in the commissions are coming at such a rapid pace that many of us are even unable to keep pace with all of them. If anything, the emergence of all those things, including the leaked emails, they emphasized the urgency for the turnaround to happen, as well as all these proposals that we're talking about. I need also to emphasize that in the discussion on strategy and tactics, there was some focus on the issue of firming up the moral or ethical fiber of the state. That all the changes that we're saying need to happen will not happen if the state, in terms of ministries and departments and state-owned enterprises, are not effective, accountable, and ethical. And perhaps to quote from the report itself, in case you might be interested, it was also said, any form of state capture by any segment of society should be condemned and combated. Yeah, I think I've responded to some of the questions.
Let me respond to three questions or three issues as raised. The first one is I agree with Comrade Joel that the analysis of the policy conference, and remember this process has been preceded by regional general councils as well as provincial general councils, that there is a groundswell that the major task that this policy conference as well as the national conference need to deal is to restore the integrity of the ANC. The suggestions therefore around addressing corruption is fairly far-reaching, and let me just read some of them. Of course, one of them is that you need to look at the ecosystem, which includes the question about strengthening understanding of the ANC values, ethics and morality, and the role that the veterans of the ANC and all of us as ANC members have to play in that regard, but also that the demands that the people, the Constitution and the rule of law of the country place on us as the guardians of the state and its resources, and that we need to stress that we need to advocate it in all forums of the ANC so that we are able to then make sure that everybody understand that this is the kind of values of the movement that we're talking about. The second recommendation on dealing with corruption is to demand that every cadre and member accused of or reported to be involved in corrupt practice, that they account to the Integrity Committee or face disciplinary processes. And so our suggestion that the powers of the ANC Integrity Committee be strengthened at the National Conference through the Constitution is therefore an attempt to be able to say that this should happen and it should have the power to decisively deal if there's such accusations and people don't come forward and account for themselves about these accusations. It also talks about that we should summarily suspend people who fail to give an acceptable explanation or voluntary step down while they face disciplinary, investigative, or prosecutions, and that the ANC should publicly dissociate itself from anyone, whether business, donor, supporter, or member, accused of corruption or reported to be involved in corruption, etc., etc. So there's a list of about 8 or 9 proposals that's going to branches, very specific on corruptions, to look at how do we, so that National Conference can take a holistic decision on it, and we can then look at how do we implement these issues. The second question is about the branches, how they will elect directly. There are other parties across the world who have, and I think they call them primaries, which means that you don't have an electoral college where you have delegates representing membership, but what you have is a system where people vote as individual members of the ANC for their NEC or their provincial executive or their regional executive committee. And that is possible with technology. We already do that as a country with how many million voters? A couple of million voters. The ANC have about 1 million members at any given point in time. With technology, it's doable to get ANC members in good standing to be able to express themselves instead of giving that vote to a branch delegate. And the kind of manipulations and difficulties that we've seen at the time. So we think it's doable. The technology exists to be able to do that, to verify whether a member is one in good standing, and secondly, to allow for them to vote directly for whether it's the PC member or the provincial executive committee, the NEC, or up to the regional executive committee. So we think it's doable. But as I say, it's a radical departure from how we've done it before. And therefore, the structures will have to discuss that. But I think that there is a groundswell of support that we need to look at a different system that gives all members the opportunity to participate. Let me conclude on this question about whether it's not too late. The ANC is 105 years old, and I think that we've gone through ebbs and flows. There were points when even the leadership of the ANC in the 1930s thought that this is the end of the organization. And one of the strengths of the movement has been its capacity to self-correct. And I think that across the Commission, there is general unity and a sense to say that we need to self-correct, that we need to reverse the decline, and that this is the moment to do that. And if we don't do it, use this opportunity in this moment, then it may be too late. So we certainly don't think it's too late. The members of the ANC don't think it's too late. The leadership doesn't think it's too late. So we're quite confident that the measures that we're proposing will lead to the restoration of the integrity of the ANC. And that is why between now and National Conference, we will certainly make sure that there's rigorous discussions about these values, about these measures, so that National Conference can take decisive decisions.
Can we give you a few minutes before the top of the hour for you to file, to cross over? The next commission is coming. Thank you very much.
Media briefing there on the strategy and tactics, as well as organizational renewal. Quite a number of things coming up there relating to the state of the ANC, how the ANC plans to deal with corruption, quite a number of policies, proposals that have been put forward, including the strengthening of the ANC's Integrity Committee, trying to give it more teeth. You'd know that, of course, the ANC has been grappling with a number of issues, and corruption is one of those things expected to take center stage in one of those commissions. If you look at some of the issues as well, we know that one of the main bones of contention as well in some of the commissions was whether to use the term white monopoly capital or just a monopoly capital. And we're hearing there that 9 out of the 11 commissions saying that, in fact, the phrase that should be used is monopoly capital, speaking to quite a number of issues as well, where we see some of the recommendations that have been made through are touching on the issues of the expansion of the top 6 of the African National Congress as well. All of this, of course, not rubber-stamped yet, will be taken to the branches of the ANC, and some of these proposals ratified at the ANC's National Elective Conference in December. Let's bring in the experts now. Prof. Mcebisi, thank you very much for your time. Quite interesting there that one of the first things that came across, apart from the dissecting the ANC, is the issue of whether to refer to white monopoly capital or just monopoly capital. We're seeing now 9 out of these 11 commissions agreeing to the use of the word monopoly capital. We did hear a bit earlier on there had been some discontent with regard to that, because the ANC itself does agree that there is still a white dominance in the economy.
That is a reinstatement of the old ANC position, that the ANC is not against a particular racial group. It's about fighting against a system. So if you are to tag it as a white monopoly capital, you are pretty much categorizing whites as a problem. And in fact, to deal with issues of transformation, you need not necessarily attach white to monopoly capital. Monopoly capital as a factor in society is itself a problem, because you have big companies that bars new entrants into the economy, you have collusion, you have high prices, you have huge exploitation, unequal income. So the very fact of monopoly capital is a problem, right? But at the same time, because it's there, you need to work with them. Hence, Joel Netshitenze was saying their relationship with monopoly capital is that of cooperation and contestation. You cooperate with them because you need the capital that they have, you need the skills that they have, but at the same time, you realize that they have a propensity to collude, to pay themselves a lot higher than workers, for instance. In those scenarios, you use the powers of the state, that is, to regulate. So the point here is that because you are fighting against monopoly capital, you need not abandon your old project of non-racialism. Ultimately, the ANC remains a non-racial organization, has been for quite some time, even before non-racialism became fashionable. So when you're confronted with challenges, you need not give up or surrender on who you are, because the values that you have are long-standing values, values of integrity. You need to affirm those and not move with the wind.
But there might be some discontent. You know, we've already heard through some of these commissions, through some of our sources, that there are those who are unhappy with the non-use of the word white monopoly capital. Those perhaps who are more radical within the African National Congress who are saying the ANC itself perhaps needs to recognize that the structure of the economy still gives that notion that the white monopoly within the economy still remains a challenge. One of the issues that Joel Netshitenze mentioned is that the collusion that you spoke about and the issue of high prices, those are just some of the issues where they say there is a bit of a problem if you look at it from that perspective.
White dominance because of our history, and at times we need not look at these things as if we are discussing them for the first time. We have a history, a very long history of oppression, colonialism and apartheid. So whites have been dominant in all sectors of our society. So that dominance continues even into the 23rd year of our independence. That's a fact that has been bestowed upon us by history. We can't deny it. But the point is that you also have to be careful that those who are talking of white monopoly capital are fake demagogues, latter-day populists, who want to detract attention away from the issues of corruption. They want to portray themselves as more radical than others. Because some of them, even though they purport to push radical economic transformation to promote local business, are in fact colluding with expatriates, with established capital, to the marginalization of indigenous up-and-coming black business. So there is a lot of dishonesty in that debate, right? So you need not be swayed by the emotions attached to that debate, but look at the problem. And the problem remains monopoly capitalism. Does white dominance still persist? Yes, it does. But you can deal with that problem by addressing issues of racial redress without necessarily fanning racial animosity.
I want to get to quite a number of other issues before we're told we can wrap up.
Yeah.
Corruption. I see quite a lot of emphasis has also been put on that. The strengthening of the integrity committee, giving powers, for example, to provincial secretaries when you look at those who may be facing allegations of corruption within the African National Congress. Do you think this would be enough to perhaps those who might say the ANC is incapable of dealing with corruption within its own ranks, the structures that have been put in place, including the Integrity Committee, need more teeth to show the ANC's seriousness in dealing with corruption, first in-house, and then dealing with corruption wherever it rears its ugly head?
In fact, that proposal is not new. 2015 NGC did say that if you are accused of corruption, you must step down. So it's good, it's well and good that this policy conference reaffirmed that position. But the critical issue... But
some would have said it's selective. Yes, you have had those who have been accused of corruption, and there has been some action taken, you've seen on the part of the ANC, but some are saying it's selective. There are those who do not face any challenge when it comes from the ruling party or the governing party, when it comes to perhaps if they're facing allegations as serious as that.
What needs to happen going forward is that 2015 NGC said that if the commission says one should step down, their decision should be binding. It should not be subject to the approval of the NEC. Here today, we've heard that it should be a statutory body with powers to summon and even fire to some degree. So that is the newness of where we are today. But the challenge, and this is an old standing challenge, is that these resolutions are made and nothing ever happens. And the other question perhaps that is lingering is that what then happens, because these are simply proposals that have to be adopted by branches. Yeah. So what happened between now and December? Because as Joel was saying is that the leaks that you have about corruption implicating ministers further taints or tarnishes the name of the ANC. So are you going to wait until the December conference ratifies these resolutions? Or are you going to have a special NEC meeting, perhaps, or something of the sort that gives some official force or binding force to these resolutions? Because there's an urgency to act now because we have these allegations that are coming out.
But then some would talk about judicial overreach. Who then has the power to find someone guilty, the ANC or the courts?
No, the Integrity Commission, as it was said in 2015, you don't have to wait for the courts to pass a verdict. If there is sufficient evidence saying Griselda is implicated in some corruption,
thankfully
then
not.
That is enough. That is enough to have that person step down. So you don't need to wait for the court. So that's the urgency. And the ANC is beginning to grasp the seriousness of the issue, especially the electoral threat that they face, that if they do not act. The other important issue, by the way, just quickly, is that for the very first time, a strategy and tactics document was titled Organisational Renewal. It dealt quite largely and specifically with addressing organizational integrity, because they realized that for an organization that lacks integrity, that imperils its capacity to achieve its own objectives. So if the ANC doesn't have credibility on its own, there's nothing that it can do.
Potgieter also mentioned that, there's a strategy on looking at these areas where they've lost power. Would you say this is some kind of acknowledgement from the ANC that they are in serious trouble?
I think they are realizing that the electoral landscape has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
That coalitions are a fact of life.
Yeah.
So they need not prepare to govern, but also prepare to be in opposition. Right.
On the issue of the NEC as well, if you look at slates, that's one of the issues that has also come to the fore. Many are saying that, for example, if you look at going to the elective conference in December, the ANC would need to do away with the issue of slates because, for example, others are saying there might be a possible split within the ANC. If you get certain delegates who do not get their preferred candidate ascending to the top job of the ANC, do you think that issue that mentioned on the slates would deal with some of a possible threat to the African National Congress with what we have seen with the Congress of the People and the subsequent formation of the Economic Freedom Fighters?
There's another issue that is attached to that. For instance, by having branches elect directly their leaders.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that the membership application process is credible, because you have people who apply for membership, but they never get their membership because the system is not modernized. For instance, you give your form to an REC member, that member keeps the form without processing it, so you wait for 2 years without getting your membership. So they need to modernize the system. You have a computerized system that from your home, you can apply and have that processed immediately. So if you have members electing directly, you also have to accompany that with modernizing the application process, eliminate inefficiencies and corrupt elements within that process. So if you continue to have the current system and yet have members electing directly, you will still have the problem of members of members. Members who are brought into the organization for the sole purpose of voting for a particular leader, right? And they then keep out members that they know, hey, that person is very critical of a certain leader, so we will not allow him into the organization, right? So what is called gatekeeping.
Gatekeeping.
Yes. There's a concerted number of measures that have to accompany all these measures.
On the issue of factionalism, once again, I mean, the ANC hasn't shied away from the fact that, factionalism is one of the major issues that plagues the African National Congress, saying that while there's a proposal put on the table to expand the top six of the ANC, one of the things that should be shied away from or watched very closely is that not one faction should ascend to fill this expansion of the top six of the ANC. How do you think perhaps the ANC would be able to circumvent that? In particular, if you look at within this policy conference, on the sidelines of it, you do see the kind of factionalism where the expectation is, of course, you see others supporting Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and the others Cyril Ramaphosa.
The issue, and this is what was said by Joel earlier, the issue is not the size, it's the quality.
Yeah.
So people first have to agree on what the priorities are, what are the major issues that the ANC has to attend to, then decide on the ordering of those issues, right? So once people agree, it's very easy to cooperate. But if you have a bigger office or elected members, and they don't agree on anything, then you are continuing the same impasse. You will still have problems. At least what is beginning to emerge here is that you have 9 out of 11 commissions agreeing with the diagnostic report that was presented by Gwede Mantashe. And that report, by the way, was preceded by massive resistance from some members who were saying it was too critical of President Zuma, for instance, and his allies. But it would emerge here that most within these commissions are saying we need to identify these issues and deal with them forthrightly. So there's a beginning consensus, convergence around the problems and how to deal with them. But again, with ANC conferences, the challenge is always, what do you do the day after adopting those resolutions?
Implementation is quite
Indeed,
key. That's one of the
yeah.
issues that they mentioned. But doesn't that, what you just said, speak directly to the fact that some have said in the run-up to this policy conference that the kinds of policies perhaps that one might see emerge might give an indication of who exactly supports who in the run-up to the elective conference. Some of those didn't want, there were people who did not want the organizational report, or rather the diagnostics report of Gwede Mantashe to be presented. Perhaps some would say those who did not want to acknowledge the dire challenges that the ANC is facing, because it might seem that one faction would use that as a springboard to indicate that perhaps one particular faction should not ascend, I guess, to the top job of the ANC.
There's a high degree of sober analysis that is emerging, of frankness, appreciation of the problems that the ANC is now facing. And the other side that did not want to confront problems really have no leg to stand on, because you really have to be blind or fake high level of stupidity to say that the ANC is not facing problems. The ANC has lost 15% of its support over a period of 8 years, right? It's now standing at 54. So obviously it faces a serious problem. It needs to reform. It needs to do things differently. So you cannot mount a reasonable argument against reforms, right? Other than simply to shout people down. And fortunately, here, sanity has prevailed. People have been allowed to add their views. And in an open debate, those who have meaningless views obviously lose the debate. What is beginning to emerge here is that the voice of reason is now prevailing, that there are things that you need to do to take the ANC out of this problem. So it's not so much perhaps a faction winning, but it's reason winning. And the ANC really wanting to increase the possibility of extending its life, right? Because if the ANC loses 2019 elections, then that's the beginning of a serious decline for the ANC. The point is that the ANC must be competitive. And for the ANC to be competitive, it must be credible. So you need to do the obvious thing to make the ANC credible so that you become competitive in 2019. And some of the things that they need to do, they know. The ANC does research all the time. Their documents are very critical of its own conduct, and there are clear steps there on what has to be done for the ANC to be competitive.
I think one could simply ask if, someone's sitting at home and says, do you think this would be enough, what we've seen thus far, the acknowledgement by the ANC of the crisis it's facing, how it's putting policy proposals forward to try and remedy the situation, and perhaps aspire confidence to the ordinary voter who is sitting, perhaps, the diehard voters of the ANC sitting somewhere with the rural support. Would this be enough then to aspire the kind of confidence in the ANC voters that it is capable of remedying and fixing the challenges that it is facing?
All these proposals lay a base. It's something to work upon, right? But the major issue is what happens between now and December. Keeping in mind that 2018 is pretty much your election year, because elections is just probably 14 months down the line, right? So the ANC needs to start its campaign here and now. And the major thing is, what does it do with the leaks that are there? What happens to the commission of inquiry that has been proposed by the Public Protector's report to deal with corruption, with state capture? So they need to prioritize that. They need to say, we have decided on this, and these are the steps we are going to take. We are going to deal with corruption harshly, right? And they then need to speak with one voice. The problem with the ANC is that you have multiple ANCs. Multiple voices that are contradicting each other. So if you have conflicting messages, then you are undermining the moral message, the ethical issues that Netshitenze was talking about, that the ANC, because the major issue that confronts the ANC is lack of credibility and integrity. That's the major issue. So if they do everything necessary to show people that they care, that they care about expenditure of public money, that they care about how they use our money, because it is our money, right? And some of this money is money intended to improve people's lives, and yet it's going into people's pockets. Massive amounts of money, millions and billions of rands. So people are worried there that the ANC is not listening, right? That the ANC only cares about protecting its own members. So you need to have a message that comes out quite forthrightly and strongly, and say, we not only hear you, but we are going to do something. Tomorrow, 2 months down the line, we are going to institute a commission of inquiry to deal with these individuals. Lindiwe Sisulu was saying the ministers that have been accused in the leaks should be suspended.
That's right.
So if you do that, that's a forceful message. And you are beginning the message of renewal. That gives you something to build upon, and hopefully by 2018, you are gaining momentum. Because you can't start in 2018 in showing people that you are changing, because there will be little time left.
The gap is too narrow.
So you need as much time as possible to harp on these measures of renewal. Not only that, but you are doing something. So if you do that over a period of a year, by election time, people will start looking at you differently and say, well, there's some truth in what they are saying. So far, people don't trust the ANC. That's what they say themselves. There's trust deficit. They say this and do something else altogether.
A lack of trust when it comes to the voters of the ANC, certainly something that it needs to rectify. We don't know if there's going to be enough time for that to aspire that kind of confidence just before 2019, and of course leading up to the ANC's elective conference, which is in December. Thank you very much for your insights. We'll certainly be talking to you a bit later on as well, Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana, just giving us some insights into what came out of that briefing, media briefing on strategy and tactics. The ANC harping on quite a number of issues there, Peter, when you talk about corruption, the ANC looking at itself, and of course, on the issues of corruption, where it would want to communicate a message that it's certainly doing something to deal with corruption, not just within the African National Congress, but within government as well. But that certainly remains to be seen. All of this still needs to be ratified, Peter. It will go back to the branches and, of course, perhaps be ratified, not all of them, probably some of them, at the elective conference in December. But the next press conference that we're expecting to get underway very shortly is on peace and stability. We'll certainly bring you all of that live and analysis straight after that.